Glossary continued. Pitch and toss, a frowned-on form of gambling. 2 pennies are tossed into the air, while bets are made as to which side the coins land. Brake, horse-drawn 4-wheeled open vehicle with seats running lengthwise. Idle the morn, not working tomorrow. Knickerbocker, loose-fitting breeches gathered in at the knees. Bunting, timber fastened into the shaft to give it added strength. Fustian, thick cotton cloth. Gove timber, timber which has to be drawn to enable the strata to fall to remove excess roof pressure. Hitch, fault in the seam. The band either rises or falls away from its course, at times entirely disappears. Drift, where the seam takes an upward or downward direction, similar to a large hitch. Hop frog, the player leaps over the bent shoulders of the one in front and takes up a similar position. Strip to the buff, strip to the waist. Chalk, manner of scoring, 1 point. Laudanum, tincture of opium. Aside, each side. Bonanza, windfall. Blacklocks, black beetles. Jowled, the roof is jowled when a pick shaft is struck against it to test for flaws. Bait, snack is usually bread and jam or bread and sugar. Into 1892. Thomas Hutchinson, Oswald Edley, John Thompson and Joseph Ashcroft, all pitmen of Brandon Colliery, began the new year on a cheerless note. All had suffered a wage reduction and the death of an infant. Severe snowstorms struck the area. Roads were blocked. Coffins en route to the Brandon village cemetery had to be manhandled. During the first 6 weeks of the year, 11 inhabitants of the colliery died. John Jobson Madgen died at the age of 52. He came to Brandon Colliery as a young man to occupy a shop in High Street. The premises still trade as a butcher's in the renamed Commercial Street. Grave unrest prevailed among the county's pitmen. All pits were affected by the coal owners' decision to reduce wages by 10%. On Saturday, February the 20th, Durham's pitmen refused to accept the cut. With the view of averting a strike, the owners adopted the following resolution. The final offer of the Owners Association is that they will accept 7.5% immediate reduction or 5% immediate reduction and 5% on May the 1st. In the event of neither of these proposals being accepted, the notices will be given on 27th of February to terminate the present contract of hiring. Immediately, the Durham Miners Association issued a ballot paper containing 4 propositions to its members. Number 1, immediate acceptance of 7.5% reduction. Number 2, immediate acceptance of 5% reduction and a further 5% reduction on 1st of May. Number 3, leave settlement in the hands of the Durham Miners Federation Board. Number 4, strike. The ballot was taken. Result, an overwhelming majority in favour of a strike. The owners' notice expired. They immediately made public a letter which said that the Durham men have refused all the proposals made out by the employers and therefore the employers have declared a lockout. On March the 12th the lockout began. Tools, gear, horses and ponies were removed from the pit. Joe Stead, Cornelius Ferguson, Will Hunter, George Neesham, Ed Walsh and other pitmen from Brandon's 3 Seams noted the withdrawal of the pit ponies and other activities quietly taking place. Desperate times loomed ahead. Northumberland levied 6pence a week on its miners on behalf of the Durham men on strike. The levy allowed for 6 shillings a week strike money to be paid to the striking men. Nearly 3,000 men met on a bit of unoccupied ground at Langley Moor. Samuel Galbraith of Brandon Colliery presided at the meeting. Samuel Whiteley, also from Brandon Colliery, moved that this mass meeting, representing a large proportion of the Federation Board, believes that the colliery owners' demand for a 10% reduction of wages is unjust and uncalled for. Mr. James Mullall, check weighman of Littleburn Colliery, seconded the motion. On Friday and Saturday evenings, March the 25th and 26th, there was a partial renewal of the disturbance of Brandon Colliery. Strikers broke the windows and doors of the house occupied by Mr. Bainbridge, one of the officials at the colliery. Extra police were standing by at the General Post Office in Durham. On April the 25th, after 6 weeks of lockout, the pitmen were hard put. The pitmen's fund was exhausted, their meagre savings spent, their families starving on a strike pay of 3 shillings a week and their children going to soup kitchens. On alternate days and after school hours, over 1,000 children crowded Brandon Colliery School, where Mr. Richardson from Durham gave every child an orange. The elderly of the colliery were provided with soup and bread on alternate days. Lord Boyne donated £20 to Brandon Workmen's Relief Committee. The Reverend A.D. Shafto gave £5. On May the 25th, the 12 weeks lockout ended. The owners wanted a 13.5% reduction. The Bishop of Durham, himself a substantial coal owner, acted as mediator. The owners consented to reopen the pits on a wage reduction of 10%. Brandon Colliery was among the majority of pits to resume work during the first half of June. Local interest among the racing pigeon fraternity was aroused when 3 of the best pigeons from Brandon Colliery were released near Bernigal. The race from Bernigal Bank to Brandon Colliery, a distance of 1 mile and 3/4, was won by George Galley's Little Bob in 1 minute 56 seconds. Woodward's Sheffielder and Turner's Greeny arrived together 2 seconds later. Paddy Moran, a 9-year-old schoolboy, wandered the colliery with his pal George Miller of similar age. With no local football to watch, they have drifted along to the allotments. Pigeon crews abound near Brandon School, from which Bobby Sayers, now 13, had just left to follow in his father's and grandfather's footsteps to work in the pit. He began his pit career in Brandon's A pit as a pony driver. Valuable pigeons are bred in crees on the fringe of the colliery rows. Galley's Little Bob, Hewitt's Tony, Turner's Pair, Jimmy and Graney, Woodwarder's Sheffielder were all class birds likely to clock 2 miles 210 yards in 2 minutes 15 seconds. Garden produce was trampled underfoot as 2 sets of youthful footprints headed towards the pigeon loft. Great concern was shown. A valuable racing pigeon had been abducted from its loft. Enquiries directed the local police constable to Paddy's home in South Street, which, with single South Street, housed so many Irish coke oven workers that the area became known as Little Ireland. A box containing a pigeon was found under a bed. The bird was unarmed. Paddy was fined 4 shillings and 6pence, a whole year's pocket money. Noisy shirt-sleeved pitmen, free on the sultry Saturday afternoon, bet and speculated on the forthcoming kite match. William Wilson of Morsley and John Smith of Brandon Colliery each handed over to the stakeholder £10. Each man, being noted for his skill at the game, kept the betting to even money. The 2-inch iron pins were driven into the ground 10 yards apart. The 4 kites each weighed 4 1/4 pounds. The game was very exciting throughout. Wilson, vocally encouraged by his friends from Moseley, played in splendid form at the finish. Won by 1 point. Wilson 41, Smith 40. Hot weather helped spread disease. 9 cases of typhoid fever were admitted to Brandon's hospital, 1 case being from Brandon Colliery. At the same time, 10 cases of scarlet fever were treated at home. The houses containing the typhoid fever victims were stoved with sulphur and the ceilings were disinfected. Brandon Local Board decided to purchase a ton of carbolic dusting powder for keeping the drains clean at a cost of 6 shillings a hundredweight, and that the ash pit contractors be supplied with a bottle each in order that they may sprinkle some of the powder in the various ash pits after they have cleaned them out. The hospital is still without a conveyance. It was proposed to buy a cab for £29. A very strong vehicle would be needed owing to the bad state of the road from Langley Moor to Brandon Village. The road would cost an estimated £1,000 to adequately repair. Nurses at the hospital decided to cheer up their 9 patients over Christmas. A Christmas tree was bought. Watson, the mineral water manufacturer, sent aerated waters. Thomas Lamb grocer sent grapes. Mr. Thompson a chicken. Mr. Headley sent toys. Lord Boyne donated a tree of evergreens for decorations. Shopkeepers in the area contributed. Uncle Toby's toys were sent to the hospital to brighten the younger patients' Christmas. 37 couples danced throughout the night. Highly polished lace boots pounded the unyielding floor of the schoolroom when Brandon Colliery's quadrille party held its annual ball. John Meeman supplied the band, consisting of piano, cornet and violin, whose lively music kept the dancers on their toes. Deep Christmas snow greeted the square dance revellers on their leaving the school at 6 a.m. Brandon Brass Band Quadrille Party, not to be outdone, terminated their season with an all-night dance. 40 couples danced from 8:30 p.m. till 6 a.m. Christmas, it seems, is a time for jollification. School children gave dramatic renderings of Blundering Barney and Love in a Collar Box. Schoolboys Ward, Shepherd, Connolly and Pynchon, together with Miss Malone, sang excellently in St. Patrick's Chapel at Langley Moor. Father Annan, an able tutor, trained the children. John Wilson's infant daughter Elizabeth and John Henry, son of Simon Thompson, joined the 54 Colliery Row inhabitants who died during the year, a large number being victims of infectious disease. Into 1893. Members of the Cooperative Society had long awaited a butchering department. Mrs. Devine, Mrs. Robson, Mrs. Curry, Mrs. Hunter, Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Laverick, all Brandon Colliery women, took full advantage of the offer of first-class beef or mutton at 1 penny per pound for 1 week when the new butchering premises were opened at Meadowfield Place. The high infant mortality rate continued throughout January. Much sorrow and distress prevailed in the colliery rows. Charles Hall, John Fox, Josh Story, William Dixon, George Jones, Jim Smith, all pitmen, and John Story, assistant schoolmaster, each lost an infant. William Madison lost his wife Mary Ann. During January, 9 inhabitants died. In early February, another depression struck the coal trade. Brandon Colliery was put on a 4-day week owing to slack business. Straken and Loves nearby, Willington, Sunnybrow and Bransworth pits were put on 14 days' notice to close. To avert a close down, the Coal Federation Board persuaded the miners to accept a 5% reduction. There was rejoicing in Brandon Colliery on April the 20th when St. Agatha's Mission Church was opened. The new church, built entirely of pitch pine, seats 500 with a total cost of £1,050, which includes furniture. The 16th century period building replaces a mission room which provided accommodation for only 200 worshippers. The mission church, founded in a house in Newcastle Street, is expected to collect the cost of the new building during the opening services. Viscount Boyne and Messrs. Straker and Love each gave £100. Brandon Albion Football Club held their annual supper in Bob Ray's Colliery Inn. Members of the team, Bob Cairns, Bart Plant, Tom Pattinson, Morty Madison, Tom Jones, Will Gustard and Alec Cook, entertained the 32 members present with lively songs and recitations. Jack Crooks, on retiring from the post of treasurer of the club, was presented with a Mason pipe. Jim Mayman ably presided on the piano. The Albions ended their successful season with Brandon St. Agatha's as opponents in a friendly match. Colliery lodges in the county were notified that owing to the need to collect crops at the farmers' request, the 23rd Miners' Gala would be deferred 2 weeks from July the 15th to July the 29th. The Durham Chronicle, just reduced from 2 pence to 1 penny for 8 sheets of news, reporting on the big meeting, stated the Brandon Colliery Lodge banner evidenced a characteristic which is particularly strong in the Durham miner, that of veneration. Upon the front of it is a capital portrayal of Alderman Fowler of Durham, whose name is revered among the miners of the county, and by his side is the well-known form of Mr. Whiteley, the Lodge Secretary. The other side of the banner illustrates the valuable truth that unity is strength. 5 speakers occupied the platforms at the gala, the 23rd to be held, 3 of the speakers being members of Parliament. On the day of the big meeting, July the 29th, members of St. Agatha's Church Choir went on an outing to the coast. 60 choristers were conveyed to Sunderland and Roker in breaks, where they thoroughly enjoyed themselves in bathing, boating and other seaside amusements. There being 32 deputies employed at Brandon Colliery, the Deputies Association applied to Brandon's Miners' Lodge for clearance papers for the deputies in the Durham Miners' Association. The coal owners seek a reduction of 25% in miners' wages. A deadlock ensued. There is talk of a county strike. the men countered with a demand for an advance of 15% on their wages. After much haggling, the men settled for a 5% reduction. After Daniel Doyle and George Simpson, screenmen at Brandon Colliery, sought a rise in wages, the union forwarded their request to the Joint Committee, who turned it down. At the same time, screenmen and labourers throughout the county had their wages settled. The county average now is 2 shillings and 7pence halfpenny plus 22%, making 3 shillings and 2pence halfpenny per day of 10.5 hours. The parents of a young boy named Edley were spared the agony of seeing the addition of his name to the list of 8 deaths in Brandon Colliery during July. The 8 died from natural causes. The Sunday afternoon peace was shattered when the 12-year-old lad, the eldest of James Edley's large family, found a box containing a few detonator caps, the type used by pitmen for detonating shots in the mine. He was playing with one of them when one exploded. His hand was severely shattered. News that 3 cases of smallpox were found in Durham's lodging houses added to local gloom. Bills were posted throughout the district cautioning people against exposing themselves while suffering from any infectious disease. Ash pits and privies were disinfected with carbolic powder. Brandon Rovers, ever desirous of helping the unfortunate, played Durham City football at Meadowfield Place. The former winning 5-0 at half-time won the game 8-0. The proceeds from a collection and concert were given to the widow and children of Mr. Turnbull, who died suddenly while attending service at the Primitive Methodist Chapel in Brandon Colliery. A good crowd watched an exciting game between Brandon Albion and Burnmore Rovers. Albion won by 1-0. On the same day, Brandon Rovers visited Hunwick to play a draw, 3 goals each. Brandon Rover reserves easily beat St Agatha's 2-0. Despite the report of 2 cases of typhoid fever and 6 of scarlet fever in Brandon Colliery, the Brandon Youth Amateur Variety Company gave a concert to a large and appreciative audience. Tom Brain and Ralph Land, the instrumentalist, Richard Crisp, Tyrolean Yodeler, John Russell, Tyneside reciter, George Hodgson and Will Todd, duettists, Aaron Nesbitt, stump speaker and nigger comedian, Henry Brain and Chris Rutherford, sentimentalists, George Hodgson, mouth harmonica, performed well, as did John William at the piano. 2 sketches were also warmly applauded. On Christmas Eve, the Pride of Brandon Lodge of the Shildon and St Andrews Equalised District Order of St Druids held their annual celebration in the 3 Tons Brandon village. Brothers Edward Meeman, Henry Throw, Steve Jones, Steve Brown and Sarah entertained the company of 40 diners with a selection of songs. 68 residents of the Colliery Rose died during the year, 14 more than last year. Into 1894. The following letter was read by the clerk at the January meeting of the local board. The members of the Brandon Lodge, which includes the workmen of the A and B pits, have had under consideration 2 or 3 questions which we conceive to be of high importance to the district and which we humbly ask you to lay before the members of the board at your next meeting, and we hope that the questions will have your careful consideration. The first question to which we wish to call your attention is the road between Brandon Village and the Boyne. The condition of this road has never been too good. We assure you that it is frequently bad, and improvement is highly desirable. The second question is in regard to the lighting of the Colliery Rose and the surrounding district. This is a matter that we have had under consideration for some time, and we think that an improvement in this direction would add greatly to the comfort and convenience of the inhabitants of the district. The third question is with respect to the making of a road through the wall at the top end of West Street. We can assure you that great inconvenience is experienced on account of the top end of this street being blocked. It would be of great advantage to the people if a way was opened at the end of this street. We are yours sincerely on behalf of the workmen, L. Cummins, W.K., Thomas Smith, John Kendrew, John Futers, F. Smith, S. Whiteley. Mr. Green, the member for Brandon Eastward, said at the council meeting that he had no hesitation in declaring that Brandon was one of the darkest and most polluted parishes in the Durham Union. Some months ago he called the attention of the members of the board to the condition of the reservoir. One day, he along with a member visited the reservoir, and what did they find in it? 3 dead dogs. He said that if there were 3 or 4 odd days, the stench from the reservoir would be sufficient to cause disease to spread into every house in Brandon Colliery. George Eliot's meat display in his butcher's shop proved too great a temptation for 2 Brandon Colliery men. They broke into his shop and stole 6 pieces of meat. On conviction, they were sent to prison for 6 months at the Durham Quarter Sessions. A Durham pitman, the correspondent says, was asked the other day what was the meaning of a living wage. A living wage, mon? Why, enough to keep the dog and myself, for buy the wife and bairns. During January, horses and ponies at the colliery consumed choppy to the amount of 4 ton 1800 weight at 7 shillings and 6pence per hundredweight, makes £36.15. Bran 600 weight at 6 shillings per hundredweight is £1.16. Old hay 1800 weight at 5 shillings per hundredweight, £4.10. On Sunday night, February 11th, a furious storm of rain and wind raged over Brandon, doing considerable damage to house property and other buildings. The Miners' Hall, a comparatively new building built of corrugated iron, suffered the most, the roof of which was about stripped off and carried for a considerable distance by the wind. Several chimneys were blown down, and the roofs of many of the houses presented a very dilapidated condition the following morning. Houses in West Street and Commercial Street suffered most damage. Fortunately, the tenants escaped injury. John Mills, Shale Bell, Edward Ramsey, John Strong, Elijah Genne, George Brown were among the many colliers dissatisfied with the committee's decisions re Brandon Air Pit. 1. That urine prices be reduced 2.5% in the following districts: North West Broken in Orton District, First West Broken, Second West All, and North Edways All in Atton Feather District, Second and Third West Broken in Tidgeburn District, South, West and North, West North East All and East Crosscut All in Crosscut District, and First Broken in Third East District in Busty Orton District, Narrow Board High Coal reduced 6%, Narrow Board Underband All North East Broken reduced 15%, Hatton Feather District, First West Broken reduced 12.5%, Second West All reduced 17.5%, North Edways All reduced 12.5%. In Crosscut South District, Broken reduced 17%, West Broken reduced 10%, North Broken reduced 15%, North West All reduced 5%, East Crosscut All reduced 7.5%. 2. That urine prices in North Flat All in Orton District in the Busty Seam be advanced 7.5%. Henry Clark, Tom Reid, James McKay, George Burleson and Tom Lowther, all colliers, some of whom hewed in the A pit, others in the B pit, were among the colliers of both pits who refused to descend the pit on Monday, March the 19th. They objected to go down as one of the men in the B pit was not a member of the Miners' Union. Settlement was reached and both men resumed work on the Wednesday. In June, Messrs. Straker and Love decided to sink the A-pit shaft a further 15 fathoms so as to work the Brockwell seam found at that depth. The sinking will in no way interfere with the normal working of the pit. All shots fired in the sinking will be detonated by electric cable, which will considerably lessen the danger to those engaged in the work. Robert Marr of Princess Street hewed coal in the A-pit. On Monday, June the 25th, halfway through his shift, he was buried under a huge mass of stone and was killed instantly. He had played the harmonium for many years at the Primitive Methodist Chapel. He had taken part in the anniversary services the day before, at which his wife and 2 children attended. Danger on the surface. Brandon Fever Hospital is kept in a state of readiness owing to the outbreak of smallpox in Durham. There are 5 cases in Durham County Hospital. A 20-year-old pitman lodging in Brandon Colliery died from typhoid fever. Heavy rain greeted the Colliery band and banner as they set off for the 24th annual Durham Miners' Gala. Colliery folk joined the expectant 50,000 present on the racecourse. Despite the continuing rain, crowds listened to the speakers from the 2 platforms. 5 had been booked to address the gathering, among them being 2 MPs and the Durham Miners' solicitor, Isidore Isaacs. Packed trains ran from Durham to Brandon Colliery at regular intervals during the afternoon. Old friends took advantage of the day to visit and stay overnight. Men who had worked at the colliery sought out ex-workmates to reminisce in the crowded Colliery Inn or Red Lion Inn. If anyone knew the taste of ale for miles around, it was Geordie. But one day while in the city, he heard of another house where it was reported to be extra special ale. That very night he made a detour in order to call at this particular tavern, and being on horseback, he rattled the sign with his whipstock, which brought out the maid. "They tell me you have some good beer," he said. "Fetch me a quart and I'll test it for myself." Geordie drank it in one draught, smacked his lips like a connoisseur, and said, "Fetch me another." The second quart went the same way. "Why," said Geordie, "they say you kept good beer here, and by goxy day, I'll get off and get some." John Roper sent birds, as did the Plant and Ritchie lofts, the occasion being the pigeon race from Ventnor in the Isle of Wight to Brandon Colliery. Owing to a mistake, the birds were liberated at Dover in very bad weather, which caused heavy loss of life among them. John Roper's pigeons won him 2 silver medals and a special prize. 2,500 people attended Brandon's first floral show and horticultural exhibition in a field adjoining the school. Flowers, fruit, rabbits, ironwork, pigeons, poultry, etc. were shown. A foot race, bowling at the wicket, kicking at goal, and a bicycle parade entertained the crowd. It was stated at a meeting of Brandon ratepayers that 4 dead dogs and 1 cat were found in one reservoir and 4 dead dogs in another. There was grave risk of disease from the evil smell. The colliery manager sent men with a pail and tar brush to dab the fencing surrounding the ponds. At the same time, there were 18 cases of scarlet fever, 4 of typhoid and 3 of diphtheria in Brandon Hospital. 23 houses have recently been stoved to help combat the diseases. The funeral cortege passed the hospital on its sorrowful journey to Brandon Village Cemetery, which was crowded for 28-year-old Will Draycott's burial. The army band from Durham played the Dead March from his South Street home to the cemetery. Will was in the 2nd Durham Artillery Volunteers and had served 7 years in the army throughout the Egyptian campaign. Brandon's football teams were active and had fared well during the season. Brandon Rovers played and beat Concert Town 4-2. Highfeld Temperance beat Brandon Albions. Brandon Rovers avenged the Albions when they beat Durham City 2nd team 5-1 at Brandon. The result of the return game was a 2-2 draw. The Local Government Act was passed. The Act places the management of parochial affairs in the hands of the people. At the same time, pitmen decided to run a candidate of their own choosing at the meeting of Brandon and Byshottle's Parish Council into 1895. At the first meeting at the North Bailey in Durham of the Brandon and Byshottle's Urban District Council on Monday, January the 11th, Mr. Green said that a young woman had died from the stench emanating from the reservoir. He had received several complaints of ash pits not being cleaned out. Mr. Green, Brandon's East Ward member of the council, declared that the scavengers were not honouring their contract. It was stated at the meeting that the cost of the council for the removal of snow from 2 miles of its roads was £18. School attendances in the area were severely depleted owing to measles and heavy falls of snow. The weather in January was so severe as to cause crows to become cannibals. 14 members of the community died during January, 12 of whom were infants, victims of measles. Brandon Unionist Association held their annual ball and social gathering in the school. A good crowd defied very bad weather to dance in the holly decorated schoolroom. The same room was crowded on the following night when Brandon Floral Society held a ball and social in aid of the funds. Brandon Colliery Private Quadrille Party held their last ball of the season. 60 couples assembled for dancing from 9:30 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. They danced with great spirit to the music supplied by Mayman and Bell. On May the 1st, pitmen throughout the county suffered a reduction of 7.5% in wages. Pitman Herbert Martin, George Willis, George Little, William Dodds and Harry Furnival, all employed at Brandon Colliery, are playing hell. The estate is uncalled for. Men maintain the roads are more jubilant. they have had their wages increased by 2 shillings per week, making them 22 shillings. Collieries are working slack time. To add to the gloom, April claimed 15 victims from the colliery rows, 7 of whom succumbed to measles. The ratepayers held a meeting in Brandon's Miners' Hall. It was stated that the road between Brandon Village and Langley Moor was in a deplorable state. Lord Boyne had promised £200. Strikers in lieu of the same amount. Many farmers and tradesmen who use the roads have promised to lend their horses and carts to lead stone from the quarry at Brandon Village. The committee of Brandon Colliery Literary Institute opened their new billiard room with handicap for the first and second teams. A crowded room watched the battle for prizes. First prize for each team, an electro-plated teapot. Second, a silver albert. Third, a silver-mounted pipe. Fourth, a silver medal. Edley Emerson and Tommy Taylor were appointed markers for the occasion. Disease is still prevalent in the area. In the first 6 months of the year, 64 victims were claimed. Bobby Sayers, now 15 years of age, after a spell of helping up, got his turn at putting. He and his mates travelled to Durham for the 25th Durham Miners' Gala, at which 5 men spoke, all of whom were members of Parliament who had come from all parts of the country. Dr. Stewart and Denham, colliery doctors, were appointed joint medical officers to Brandon Colliery Hospital at a salary of £10 each per annum. There being no street lights in Brandon Colliery, residents are tripping over deep ruts. A walk at night is a positive hazard. At a special meeting of the Urban Council, the surveyor, Mr. R. Gardner, presented a scheme and estimate cost of lighting the district with oil and gas lamps. The estimated cost of laying down 60 oil lamps was £165 and maintenance would be about £100 a year. 50 gas lamps would cost £150 and their maintenance would amount to between £120 and £130 a year. Dark nights meant more indoor entertainment. St. Patrick's gave their annual concert in the schoolroom. The first item was an overture by members of St. John's String Band, the Caliph of Baghdad. Sentimental comic songs passed away a most pleasant evening. Mr. Tom Connolly's comic song, The Brick Came Down, received a well-deserved encore. Footballers were busy at the end of the year. Ledgate Exiles beat Brandon Rovers 2-1. Boyne Stars were playing a 2-2 draw with Brandon Swifts when a third goal was claimed by the former. The referee disallowed it. Stars being dissatisfied with the referee's decision, the players left the field. Brandon Rovers beat Oakenshaw Heroes 7-1 at Brandon. Brandon Rovers were again the victors when they beat Cockfield 2-1. Brandon St. Agatha's were also in good form around Christmas. A billiard handicap held over Christmas holidays in the Literary Institute drew 38 competitors who were divided into 2 divisions, the prizes in each section being first a turkey, second goose, third a hare, fourth a couple of rabbits. 85 competed in the domino handicap, which offered the same prizes as the billiard handicap. 97 colliery folk died during the year, 33 more than in 1894. The measles epidemic, so active during the year, boosted the total. Into 1896, Brandon's Social Quadrille Party let in the new year with its annual dance, which was held in the schoolroom. Miss Caselaw and Miss Gibbons were MCs when 50 lively couples danced to the music supplied by John Bell. Mr. Connolly and Mr. Mayman entertained with songs. The Quadrille Party sent 2 guineas to Brandon Fever Hospital towards buying toys for the children. Durham pitmen showed their disapproval of the Conciliation Board, which has been in operation for 1 year. During January, a ballot was taken. 30,000 voted against retaining the Conciliation Board. 14,894 voted for the maintenance of the board. The Joint Committee awarded 13 young help groups an advance of 1 penny per day. They were F. Graney, S. Cutler, R. Gibbs, J. Harker, W. Howden, J. Gill, R. Rumley, W. Richardson, J. Little, M. Murphy, C. Bullows, W. Jones and J. Woodward. John Gilbert, an engine playing man, was awarded fourpence a day. They were among the 1150 men and boys who draw coal from Brandon's three seams, the Hutton, Busty and the Brockwell. 3 shafts are in use. The former seam produces coal from its coal, while the deeper seams produce coal to make the best quality coke. A 45 feet wattle fan ventilates the Brockwell, and the 35 feet gerbil fan serves the Hutton and Busty seams. Bob Sayers followed his grandfather and father into the pit. At the age of 15, after waiting his turn, started putting in the Busty seam. As Bob began his pit career, so to speak, Hugh McDermott ended his. Hugh died at the age of 63, after having spent the greater part of his life in Railway Street. Hugh's son, another Hugh, at 33 is a coal hewer. The Sayers family attend Mount Calvary Methodist Chapel, where Mr. J. Williams ministered since 1889. He left the area and Mr. J. Bowden took over his duties. The new minister arrived as the measles epidemic reached its peak. Measles had claimed 4 infants during the month of January. 14 infants and 2 lads of school age fell to the disease during February. The outbreak of measles, combined with whooping cough, accounted for the low percentage of attendance at Brandon Colliery and Langley Moor St Patrick's schools. The majority of the latter school scholars reside in Brandon Colliery. The field adjoining the school provides for Brandon Colliery's 2 football teams. Brandon Rovers and Brandon Swifts entertain a good crowd of pitmen supporters. They fell to County Exiles and the Boyne Stars. Brandon Swifts beat the Dunelmians 3-1 and played a draw with New Bottle Villa. On Monday, April 13th, devastating news engulfed the Colliery Rose. News of a terrible explosion having occurred at Bransford Colliery, lying just over 2 miles up the road, reached Brandon Colliery. Both pits are in the Strakerlove group of collieries. Many workmen at present at Brandon Colliery had worked at the ill-fated pit. They were acquainted with some of the identified victims. The disaster claimed the lives of 20 men and boys. A deputy overman was sent from Brandon Colliery to render aid underground. A week following the Bransford disaster, tragedy struck Brandon Colliery. 55-year-old Matthew Peel hewed coal in the sea pit. On Tuesday, April 21st, he was buried beneath a large heap of stone. William Bales, deputy overman, heard the stone fall. He and Ewer Tom Lee rushed to the scene. It took a team of workers 20 minutes to recover Matt Peel's extinct body. More gloomy news. On Friday, July the 17th, the day before the 26th Derry Miners' Gala, between 50 and 60 Brandon Colliery workmen received notice to terminate their engagement at the colliery. The owners are desirous of restricting output and will therefore close a working district in the colliery until such time as an improvement in the coal trade justifies them in reopening it. Brandon Colliery Horticultural Society held its 3rd annual show. The North Eastern Railway Company ran a cheap excursion from Newcastle to Brandon Colliery. Despite showery weather, 5,000 enthusiasts visit the show, in which 1,500 exhibitors from all parts of the north of England participated. A Bishop Auckland solicitor said that the exhibits proved that there was a love of gardening in the place and a vast amount of skill and industry. Visitors to Brandon Colliery usually get lost in the dark labyrinth of long streets, coke ovens, railway lines and coal wagons. Strangers and residents alike rejoiced when on November the 5th, 100 gas lamps illuminated the east and centre wards of Brandon and Byshottles for the first time. Hundreds of Brandon Colliery folk, being in the bigger centre ward, turned out into the main thoroughfare to witness the lighting of the streets. Guy Fawkes Day was celebrated with a profuse display of fireworks. The night being dark, the lamps were seen to their best advantage. Brandon Rovers met Sunderland Nomads in the 3rd round of the English Amateur Cup. Good football had forced a draw on 2 occasions. At the 3rd meeting of the teams, a jubilant crowd saw the Rovers win 4-2 when the game finished in semi-darkness. Brandon Colliery Literary Institute provided a more sedate Christmas cheer when it held its annual billiards, dominoes and draughts handicaps. The results being: first team billiards, G. Christie, goose; second, Robert Cairns, stone of beef; third, J. MacDonald, leg of mutton; second team billiards, First, Matt Ayres, a goose. Second, Arch Robson, stone of beef. Third, Edley Emerson, leg of mutton. Winners in the Domino handicap were first Chris Edley, a goose. Second, W. Cook, stone of beef. Third, Tom Batty, leg of mutton. Fourth, H. Selway, leg of pork. Fifth, J. Felton, a duck. Sixth, Peter Campbell, a pair of rabbits. The winners in the Drabs games being Josh Pybus, leg of mutton, T. Graham, a duck, William Hutchinson, couple of rabbits. 59 Brandon Colliery residents died during the year, the majority again being infants, victims of measles and whooping cough. Into 1897, the golden orb shed its brilliance on the scene below. Brandon Colliery streets, hitherto in half shadow despite the recent installation of lamps, stood out in shining relief. The man in the moon seemed to smile as he watched the antics of the Colliery folk. Figures, all male, tall and short, stood at every street end and numerous yard gates. Driver lads, helper-ups, putters, surface workers, and even older colios were in evidence. Midnight approached. Restive first-footers awaited the signal. Prompt 12 o'clock, buzzers from the surrounding collieries joined Brandon Colliery buzzer to welcome in the new year. Before the buzzers ended their raucous symphony, first-footers were banging on the door shouting, "Happy New Year, missus!" On the kitchen table, awaiting the first man or boy to cross the doorstep in the new year, stood the usual piece of spice cake, drink and money. Strong drink was strictly reserved for the older first foot. Jack had asked his mother to be his first foot. Geordie duly turned up on the stroke of midnight. After sampling the proffered whisky, Geordie said to Jack's wife, "Meg, why there was never out like this when I was a lad." "What, nae whisky?" said Meg. "Nay, plenty of whisky," replied Geordie, "but never such a small glass." Two football games delighted crowds on New Year's Day. Brandon Rovers played Cockfield. Both teams are in the Weir Valley League. Brandon Swifts versus Meadowfield United, both in the Mid-Durham League, made up the other game. This local derby game aroused great interest. Brandon Swifts had vanquished only 2 days before a much-fancied Langley Park United, another member of the Mid-Durham League. William Lee, General Daly, John Woodward, Bob Johnson and John Gravison, all miners, lost a son in the space of a few days. An epidemic of measles took 11 infants in 1 week. In an effort to control the epidemic, Brandon School was closed from April the 17th until May the 17th. Bob Sayers, now a robust 17-year-old, after a spell of putting in the air pit, joined 3 more putters and started coal-ewing. As per custom, their places were taken by 4 helpers up. In their turn, drivers took over from the helpers. Paddy Moran, born and bred in Double South Street, left St. Patrick's School at the age of 13. Tall and wiry, he started work on the following Monday as helper up. He was spared the apprenticeship of driving. Paddy's sister Mary had just married John Ryan in St. Patrick's Chapel. The couple moved straight into a house in Single South Street. 10 colliery men landed themselves in the Durham Police Court. 9 were fined 6 each and costs for playing pitch and toss. The other defendant was fined 5 shillings for drunkenness. Great excitement prevailed on the occasion of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. The District Council decided to give each child in the Brandon and Byshottles district a steel enamelled mug as a memento to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Queen's accession to the throne. £70 was the sum of money seconded to pay for the mugs. 4,170 mugs at a cost of 4 each were distributed. 1,300 children from Brandon Colliery and Brandon Village East received a mug. On Diamond Jubilee Day, June the 22nd, the owners gave 20 guineas towards providing a tea for the colliery children. Brandon Miners Lodge, A and B pits, celebrate the Jubilee by giving a substantial dinner and tea to the permanently disabled pitmen, superannuated members and widows. The dinner consisted of mutton, pork, lamb and veal pie. Plum pudding followed as sweet. After tea, field sports were run for the old men and women. Foot and other races were organised. The old men were given 3 shillings each. The day's highly successful celebrations ended with the lighting of a massive bonfire on a vantage point on Pithouse Fell. On the 3rd Saturday of July, Durham miners held their 26th annual gala. 6 speakers graced the 2 platforms, 4 of whom were members of Parliament. Mr. Jim Robson of Brandon Lodge seconded a resolution from number 2 platform. During the afternoon, under a merciless sun, clouds flocked from the racecourse to Durham's Cathedral for the first ever Miners' Day service. The cathedral was packed to the doors on this special occasion. Brandon's representative on the Brandon Urban District Council referred to the dire need for better lighting at Brandon Colliery Railway Station. The gas lamps promised 12 months ago have not yet been erected. There were over 1,000 entries in the livestock section, 800 in the floral department and 400 in the industrial section when Brandon Colliery Flower Show held its annual event in the field adjoining the school. 3 large tents were erected to hold the exhibits. There were 153 entries for the foot handicap, in which £15 was given in prizes. Bookmakers attended in force to cater for the betting fraternity. The judge for the racing had to be escorted from the grounds by several policemen, his verdicts not being popular. Trains ran from York, Sunderland, Newcastle, Middlesbrough and Hartlepool for the occasion. 2 weeks after the foot handicap at the Flower Show, the judge's ruling was objected to and the race was rerun at the same venue. Thanks to the efforts of the Committee of Management, H. Goundry, H. Martin, W. Rounding, R. Robson, W. Brumley, A. Rowland, F. Lightfoot and J. Ramsey, the event was a resounding success. Continued on side 10. By the end of August, 44 residents of the colliery had died. Once again, the victims were mainly infants, a high percentage for 8 months. Despite the high death rate, there was an absence of infectious disease. 4 children died from diarrhoea during that period. At the meeting of the Brandon District Council, it was stated that the open channels in Single South Street and Low Princess Street were very much in need of repair. The owners were served with notices to put in proper drains with traps. During August, Brandon Colliery's Busty Seams agreement was confirmed. Hatton Feather, 4th West, advanced 12.5%. North Flat advanced 12.5%. 2nd West reduced 12.5%. Tidgeburns Crosscut 2nd West reduced 5%. Tidgeburns North Flat 2nd West reduced 2.5%. The men in the B Pit Hutton Seam asked for an advance on new prices in South West Edways Landing East, South Wales Landing West, Pittimee North Board, All, Pittimee 2nd North Broken, Pittimee 1st North East, 3rd North Broken and 3rd North East All. Their request was not entertained as the U was concerned in not carrying out the decisions of January the 8th, 1894. Putters in Brandon A Pit, after a dispute with the overman, left work. The walkout affects a number of coal ewes who are laid off work pending a settlement. Some of the ewes and putters affected helped to make up Brandon's football teams. 5 teams operated in the colliery area: Brandon Blackwatch, Brandon United, Brandon Albion, Brandon Celtic and Meadowfield Rovers entertain lovers of the sport. Their games with Waldridge Fell, Giles Gitmore Albions, Sladeburn Rising Stars, Sunnybrow Olympic and the Boyne Rising Star produced a superabundance of goals. Consistent scorers for the local teams were Pat McVeigh, Edward Cummings, Tom Kyle, James Moran, Joe Smith and Jack Haley. The Christmas season began with heavy snowfall, through which troops of carol singers plodded on their tour of the streets. Special services and entertainments were held in the various chapels. Into 1898. As usual, the colliery buzzers welcomed in the new year. First footers were once again out in force, chanting hopefully the rhyme, "Happy New Year to ye, God send ye plenty. Where ye have £1 note, I wish you may have 20. During the morning, Brandon Celtic played Quebec St. Michael's in an association football game, which Celtic won 6-4. Edward Cummings, Jack Haley, Joe Smith, Danny Doyle and Edward McVeigh entertained the fair crowd with skillful football. Brandon won 6-0 in the return visit, in which Jack Haley, James Moran and Joe Smith shone. Yet another team has sprung up in Brandon. Brandon Villa versus Sherburn Hill Rovers produced good football, which enabled the former team to win 2-1. Jack Clennon and George Robson scored for the Villa. The sound of the New Year buzzers had barely faded when the ewes and putters of 9 districts in the Seepit Brockwell seam were asked to accept low wages. The reductions varied from 5% to 17%. One district was advanced 8%. Open channels run alongside all colliery houses. One sink is provided for about 20 houses. As the channels are a serious threat to health, Brandon District Council asked the owners, Messrs Straker and Love, to put a sink in every 2 houses. During March, 1 case of typhoid fever and 1 of erysipelas were reported. These cases were treated at home as the hospital was kept in readiness for any case of smallpox that might occur in the district. The surveyor reported that the scavenging contractor had not been doing his work. He had written to him 4 times and given him notice to clean out 40 ash pits and privies which he had neglected. A charity concert originally planned for the Miners' Hall had to be held in the much larger Brandon School. 700 tickets were sold for the show. The proceeds went to 19-year-old John Graney, who suffered an accident 6 months previously. He is now totally blind. All the artists gave their services freely. Peter Keenan sang Millie Clare, Widow of Wicklow and Death of Nelson. Tom Connolly and Jim Beeman gave several pieces. These 2 young men are great favourites and their comicalities prove most amusing. On Tuesday night, May the 26th, Mrs. Kyle waited anxiously in her South Street home. Her husband Paddy, a coal-hewer in the sea pit, was long overdue from work. Paddy's deputy in the back shift lived next door. He had returned from work, bathed and was dressed, ready for his night out. As he closed his door behind him, Mrs. Kyle shouted across the intervening yard wall, "Paddy hasn't got home yet. Have you seen him?" Fearing the worst, the deputy rushed to the pit. Paddy was found in his workplace. He had been trapped, suffering a broken back, for 2 hours under a large stone. Paddy was taken home on a stretcher, placed in a colliery ambulance. Brandon Colliery's Homing Society's members organised the first old bird race of the season. 9 members sent 90 birds to Normanton for liberation. Great local interest was shown in the new Barker timing machine. Mr. Tom Bartle manipulated the instrument. Bart Plant's birds won 1st, 2nd and 3rd places with 794, 784 and 774. J. Ritchie and J. Johnson gaining 3rd and 5th places for their lots. Another fatal accident in the Bee Pit. Adam Todd, driver lad, son of William Todd, a colliery brakesman, was killed in a most unfortunate accident. As Adam was driving a load of tubs, firing of shots in the distance dislodged a stone which, falling on him, terminated his life. Young Adam Todd was buried in the graveyard at Brandon Village at the same time as John Henry Wharton, a 23-year-old Slaburn pitman who had been killed by a fall of stone in the old pit there. Over 1,000 sympathisers from the 2 collieries crowded into churchyard. Excellent work by the committee guaranteed success for Brandon's 5th Flower Livestock and Industrial Show. Mr. Bowes, an able bandsman, conducted Brandon Brass Band, which played throughout the day. 180 doughty runners fancied their chance in the 120 yards foot handicap race for prizes worth £16 10 shillings. Tom Clennon of Brandon Colliery took a day off scoring for his local team when he married Jane Stronach of Rye at Durham Register Office. The couple moved into a colliery house provided by the owner. In a colliery district, the school inspector was questioning the children as to their knowledge of the Bible. "Why did Noah build the ark?" asked the inspector. The class was silent. Then suddenly a bright-faced boy put up his hand. "Well, Tommy," said the inspector. "Please, sir, it was 'cause his father couldn't get a colliery house," was the bright boy's reply. The ever-popular quoits attracted a large gathering of spectators when William Freak of Brandon Colliery challenged George Hunter of Sleetburn to a game for £25 a side. The conditions were 10 yards on the sward. After a good game, Freak emerged the winner by 9. The final score being Freak 41, Hunter 32. A game of fives, another popular sport, took place on the alley adjoining Robert Richardson's hostelry at Brum Park, over the valley from Brandon Colliery. Gamblers and non-gambling spectators left the colliery environs to witness the battle. They took the narrow road skirting the fiery heaps, crossed the Sleeburn Road and the River D&S and up the incline to Broome Park. The contestants with leather gloves on work-hardened hands came over from the colliery. J. Little took on 2 men. J. Duffy elected to partner Peter Carey in a game of 33 chalks up for £10 a side. Bob Montgomery, also from Brandon Colliery, was stakeholder and referee for the game, which Little, who was 5-4 on favourite, won 33 chalks to 17. Little's. On Christmas Eve, Brandon United played a draw with East Howell 1-1 in an exciting football match watched by pitmen enjoying a long weekend rest. As Christmas Day fell on a Sunday, they will take the Monday off. The day after New Year's Day will also be a holiday. To save friction, the lodges were asked to send delegates to the colliery manager notifying him of their intention. It had been agreed in July 1881 that Christmas and New Year's Days should henceforth be kept as holidays. Into 1899. The first pit casualty of the year occurred on January 11th. James Kidman, a 22-year-old putter, left his home 64 Sunderland Street just before 6 a.m. His journey to the A pit was a short one. His shift was due to finish at 4 p.m. At 3:15 p.m, all tubes having been filled and put to the landing, James was standing alongside the full set, which was ready and awaiting the arrival of the empty set. The oncoming run of tubes became derailed and knocked down several props and displaced 2 long balks. A fall of roof engulfed James. He sustained severe injuries to his head and abdomen. He died the same night. Ralph Cairns, a Brandon Colliery pitman and a regular player for the Institute team, was in good form. A billiards handicap was staged in Langley Moor's Grand Hotel. 14 players participated in the 200 up contest. Ralph notched second place. He had 45 start. His prize was a billiard cue in a case. Ralph scored 127 for his team Brandon Colliery Institute when they travelled to Newton Cap near Bishop Auckland to play them in the Durham Miners Billiards League, in which all collieries in the county were eligible to play. Brandon's team scored 531, R. Cairns 127, T. Pattinson 150, J. MacDonald 150, B. Walker 114, J. Dorden 104. Newton Cap's team replied with 520. In the same league run by Burroughs and Watts Limited, Brandon beat Sunnyside 521 to 501, who hope to reverse the decision when they come to Brandon for the return match. The 4-year-old daughter of Tom Turner, a colliery wagon wheelman, died in the Brandon Infectious Diseases Hospital. 4 cases of scarlet fever and 4 cases of typhoid fever, 3 of whom came from one house, were reported. Sulphur candles and steam were recommended for stoving out the infected houses. Sorrow too for Robert Ray, the popular landlord of the Colliery Inn, when he lost his 54-year-old wife Mary. Mrs. Ray helped run the cricket team she had founded. She helped one of the Brandon Colliery football teams. Colliery sporting fans flocked to Brandon village for a burial. Their 21-year-old son Tom William died 2 years ago. The 23-stone Father Richard Matthias Hannon was a familiar figure in Brandon streets. For the last 19 years he has been in charge of St. Patrick's Mission at Langley Moor. He died in Durham County Hospital at the age of 49. His successor, the Reverend Father Thorman from St. Mary's Cathedral in Newcastle, took over the mission. A few days after his arrival he performed his first marriage ceremony when he married a Brandon Colliery couple, Edward Jones and Winifred Carroll. On Easter Saturday, Peter Keenan married Mary Ann Doran from Crook. The Reverend J. Lawson married 10 couples in the space of 2 weeks in St. John's Church, all from Brandon Colliery. W. Humphreys married Miss Jane Aberdeen at Durham Register Office. Geordie got married to a widow, and one morning, as he was sitting at the kist, his mother named Jim said to him, "Thou's fond of a trade, Geordie, getting married to the widow?" "Naught of the sort," replied Geordie. "I think I'll get in a bargain." "How's that?" queried Jim. "Why," said Geordie, "thou sees she has 5 lads working, and 2 big wenches, and a fat bacon pig in the sty, and thou sees, Jim, it only cost me 700 a licence." Friday, July the 21st, was no ordinary Friday. It was the day before the 29th Durham Miners Gala. Paddy Moran, now 15 and a putter in the A pit, was finished for the week. He knelt over the tin bath set in the middle of the kitchen. His sister Mary washed his back. She was after a few pennies to spend at Brandon's Friday market. Paddy and his mates would not patronise the market on the eve of a gala. They wanted their money for the big day. Mary, proceeding with the back cleaning, inadvertently erased the button on Paddy's back, exposing the raw flesh. "Ouch!" howled Paddy. Later he smiled to himself. He almost shouted, "Close the bloody pit in and give the farmer his bloody field back," an epithet often passing the lips of harassed putters and helper-ups. Brandon Lodge sent a request to the Joint Committee that 3 unmarried Colliers working at the colliery who keep their parents and the heads of families be allowed colliery houses free of rent. The 3 CPTUs were granted free colliery houses by the arbitrator Thomas Lambert, Esquire. Other collieries in the county, seeing this as a test case, applauded the award. Men and boys preparing themselves for work, women making school children's breakfast, were aghast at the terrible news. Accounts were rife concerning the explosion which had occurred at 8 a.m. in the East Flat, Jubilee district at Brandon Colliery Sea Pit. The same employs 200 men, 70 of whom were at work at the time. The explosion was confined to a small area of the mine where shot firing operations were in progress, 1 3/4 of a mile from the shaft. Francis Murphy, a 20-year-old putter and son of John Murphy, a retired pitman of Brandon Colliery, and Enoch Griffiths Collier, 30 years of age, with a wife and 2 children at 28 Park Street, were victims of the explosion. 4 the pitmen, William Carr, deputy, Frank Robson, putter, Ralph Broadbent, Ewer, and George Robson, putter, were so severely injured that they died later at their homes. A total of 6 lives lost in this, the second disaster in 2 years, 20 having died at Willington in a sister pit, another of the Straight and Love group of collieries. James Little, deputy, although injured in the blast, together with another deputy, Ralph Rumley, had to encounter foul air for a considerable distance in order to recover William Carr, whom they dragged out in an unconscious condition. Among the rescuers was Mr. Dacus the overman, who was overcome by stiff and had to be removed to the surface, where Doctors Denham and Green rendered medical aid. Hundreds of people journeyed to Brandon Colliery, both by road and rail, causing obstruction near the pit head, seeking more news of the worst pit accident of the year in Durham County. On Saturday, August the 19th, the bodies of Ralph Broadbent, William Carr and George Robson were carried to the last resting places. 2 of the victims had already been interred. Brandon Colliery Band, playing the Dead March, headed the procession of about 1,000 sorrowing people. It was the saddest sight of Brandon Colliery's inhabitants have had to endure when the 3 victims were carried to their allotted places in Brandon Cemetery. A survivor gave testimony of the brave and unselfish action of William Carr. As a deputy charged with the safety of other men, and even though most seriously burnt, he deliberately put on one side the invitation to escape and went back. We are not rich enough in human life to pay a price as we paid in the explosion. Deeds have been done in the darkness of the mine and amidst the most appalling dangers which ennoble our nature, and which if done in the light of day and before the world would have covered those humble miners with glory. 2 weeks after the disaster, the 6th annual exhibition of the Brandon Society drew a record crowd. Visitors discussed the tragedy with survivors and rescuers as they moved round the 3 large marquees in a field near the pit. The number of livestock, poultry, pigeons, rabbits was also a record, being 1 short of 1,000. Many of the exhibitors were well-known fanciers from distant parts of the country. There were 174 entries for the handicap foot race. The handicapper was Matthew Bates, landlord of the Red Lion Inn. 47 cases of typhoid fever were reported at Bishop Auckland. As trains take shoppers to the stricken area every Saturday, there are fears of the disease spreading. 7 cases of typhoid fever at Brandon Colliery were admitted to the hospital. Disinfectant was distributed and infected clothing ordered to be destroyed. Thomas Burt, a 25-year-old pitman, died from typhoid fever. Owing to an epidemic of measles at the same time, both Brandon Colliery and St. Patrick's schools had a low percentage of attendance. Supporters of quoit player William Frake of Brandon Colliery walked the mile to Langley Moor to bet and cheer him on in his game against J. Vickers of Toughdale for £50. Despite the crowd's vociferous encouragement, Freak trailed behind Vickers, who won 41 chalks to 23. At Christmas, the Durham Provision Market had an offer: beef from 6 a pound, pork 6 a pound, mutton 6 a pound, veal 8 a pound, bacon 4 to 6 a pound, hams 5 to 6 halfpenny a pound, potatoes 7 a stone, tea at a shilling and 1/4 a pound. Trains picking up at Brandon Colliery were full of eager shoppers and children keen to shop gaze. Into 1900. Brandon Colliery station employees gathered in Matt Ray's Colliery Inn. They began the new year by celebrating with a dinner held annually. Their station master, Mr. Fothergill, took the chair. After toast to the Queen and Royal Family, subscribers, host and hostess, Messrs. Nesbitt, Rutherford, Bryce and Roper entertained the company with harmony. Paddy Moran, now 16, finished putting to start coal union as the Durham miners' wages were advanced 5%. The increase to remain until the August meeting of the Board of Conciliation and not to be touched under any circumstances. The miners welcomed the thought of a stabilised wage for 6 months. 5 years ago, Mr. Green, draper of Brandon Colliery and a member of the Brandon Urban Council, stated that Brandon was one of the dirtiest and darkest places in the county. Once again he brought the matter up at the council meeting. He said that sanitary improvements are required in Brandon Colliery streets. In some cases there was only one sink for a whole street of houses, and during wet weather they overflowed onto the streets, several of which in a bad state of repair. Another member of the council said it was an abominable state of affairs and a disgrace to a firm like Messrs. Straker and Love. Scavengers are not doing their job. They never saw the bottom of the netty. Schools had a low percentage of attendance owing to the epidemic of influenza, whooping cough, measles and eczema. Jane and Matthew Wood lost their 15-year-old daughter, a victim of typhoid fever. One case of erysipelas and one of scarlet fever were reported. The first quarterly meeting of the newly formed Brandon and District Anti-Vaccination League, which according to the promoters has been formed for purposes of aggression and mutual defence, was held on Saturday, March the 31st. Numerous people have been summoned for not having their children vaccinated against infectious diseases. It was stated that in Brandon alone, something like 90% were against vaccination. A 13-year-old Brandon Colliery boy was summoned for a breach of the Mines Regulation Act. He unlocked his lamp while down the pit. He had used a nail to dismantle it, took out the gauze to get more light, then fitted the lamp together again. The court decided not to convict, but ordered him to pay the court expenses. His father had given him a good thrashing. The court thought it the best deterrent. On May the 17th, the Boers raised the siege of Mafeking. The next day it was declared official. The news called for celebration. The streets of Langley Moor presented a very gay appearance. An evening procession was formed consisting of representations of mounted infantry, Boers and leading spirits of the war, and various other personages arrayed in grotesque outfits, the rear being brought up by an effigy of Kruger. Headed by the Brownie Brass Band, the procession proceeded by way of Meadowfield to Brandon Colliery, the way being lighted by blazing torches which the processionists carried. The streets were thronged by eager sightseers who gave hearty cheers for the hero of their hour, Lord Roberts, and the officers commanding the relief party. Burlesque bands composed of Tom and Jerry's, bugles, tin whistles and Jews' harps caused much merriment, and there was a splendid display of fireworks. Collections were taken in aid of the Reservist Fund. Brandon Cokeman collected £1.03 for the Durham Soldiers and Sailors Fund. Brandon A and B pits donated £8.19, while the mechanics and enginemen sent their sixth instalment to the fund, £1.11 and twopence. Corporal Shell of the 82nd Battery Royal Field Artillery, now serving with the 6th Battery Western Division Durham Light Infantry in South Africa, wrote to his brother residing in Brandon Colliery. He sent a lengthy and interesting letter in which he said he had just finished 6 rough months fighting but had escaped injury. He thought the war would last another 12 months unless the British government tries some sterner methods. such as hanging or shooting all rebels, train wreckers, abusers of the white flag, and those who take no notice of the rules and usages of civilized warfare. Let the boys who are still in the field see that we are determined to put an end to their guerrilla tactics, etc. It is not the fighting, but the marching which knocks the heart out of the troops. The football season got into swing with Brandon Rangers playing in the Durham District League when they beat Dean Burns 6-1. They beat Brownie Rangers by the same margin. Stanley Moore were Rangers' next victims when they came to Brandon. They lost 3-1. The Good Templars gave a lantern entertainment in their hall. A good audience appreciated the pictures thrown upon the scene which illustrated a tour around the world in 100 minutes. Mr. J. Jenkins, the new minister to Mount Calvary Methodist Chapel in Commercial Street, arrived in time to officiate at the Christmas services. He followed Mr. J. G. Bowden, and he's the chapel's 9th minister since it was opened some 27 years ago. Shops stocked up for Christmas with hams for 6.5 a pound and tea from 1 shilling and 2pence to 1 shilling and 9pence a pound. For the adventurous, a guinea hamper produced 1 bottle of fine Scotch whisky, 1 bottle of fine Irish whisky, 1 bottle of old cognac brandy, 1 bottle of London gin, 1 bottle of old port, 1 bottle of dinner sherry, 1 bottle of Jamaica rum, and 1 bottle of British wine. A new century. The colliery buzzers and hordes of first footers seemed extra exuberant in their welcome to a new year and the start of a new century. Ramsay Guthrie writes at length about the custom of first footing and Yule dues in his new book Kitty Fagan. The scene is laid in Brandon. Brandon Miners' Lodge provided a dinner in the Miners' Hall for the old people of the colliery. Tables laden with beef, pork, mutton, turkeys and puddings greeted the guests. Tea was laid on in the afternoon. Afterwards the men received tobacco and pipes. The women each got a half-pound of tea. The old folk were further entertained in Brandon Colliery School by the Jackson Minstrel Troupe. Songs and choruses were well rendered, and a burlesque sketch, The Demon Phonograph, which closed the concert, was very amusing. The nation mourned the loss of Queen Victoria, who died at Osborne at 6:30 on Tuesday evening, January 22nd, after a reign of nearly 62 years and a half. Queen Victoria was crowned on June the 28th, 1838. The Brandon and Boyne brass bands led the procession from Langley Moor to St. John's Church, Merrifield, where the Reverend Joseph Lawson conducted a memorial service. The bands played the Dead March in Saul. Tradesmen in Brandon and Boyne kept their shops closed all day on Saturday, February the 2nd, the day of the funeral. The coal depression continues. One pit in the county has given 800 men notice to quit work. Another colliery has handed out 200 notices. Miners at Brandon Colliery are apprehensive for the future. Brandon Colliery deputies, despite the dim outlook in the coal trade, held their first social. It was a huge success. Mr. Thomas Parrish, in the name of the deputies, asked Mr. T.L. Elman, the colliery manager, to take the chair. There were 60 applicants for the posts of surveyor, salary £120 per annum, and inspector of nuisances, salary £100 per annum. Surveyor, Mr. R. Gardner, had hitherto done both jobs for Brandon and Byshottle's Urban District Council. By the end of March, 18 Brandon Colliery residents had been buried. During the month, the measles epidemic spread to Brandon Colliery and caused 5 deaths. Brownie British, St. Patrick's and Brandon Colliery schools had a low percentage owing to the epidemic. Brandon Institute played the final game of the season when they played Rye Miners Hall before a large crowd at Brandon. Both village teams were in good form and spectators enjoyed one of the best games to be played in Brandon Institute. Robert Cairns and Bob Cairns each scored 150, J. MacDonald 141, J. Pratt 109 to narrowly win by 20 points. Brandon finished in the middle of the Houghton District Billiard League, consisting of 7 colliery villages. They climbed to second position in the Burroughs and Watts Miners League. Friendly societies held a church parade. The procession was headed by the Brandon section of the 2nd Durham Volunteer Artillery, and the Sleadburn section paraded with Brandon, Merrifield and Langley Moor to the Brandon St. Agatha's Mission Church. The following societies were also represented: Druids, Free Gardeners, Rational Association Oddfellows, Sons of Temperance, Rechabites, Brandon Langley Moore IOGT members. £8 10 shillings was collected en route. John Alsop, Bob Thompson, Thomas Kane, James Gillings and George Bainbridge, all miners, lost an infant during August. Scarlet fever and measles claimed most of the 53 victims who succumbed during the first 8 months of the year. There were 17 cases of mild typhoid fever. The large and insanitary privy ash pits were an important factor in the spread of disease. 10 patients occupy Brandon Hospital, 6 scarlet fever and 4 typhoid fever. Despite epidemics of typhoid fever, scarlet fever and measles, newcomers came to sample what the colliery had to offer. Owen Woods decided to leave his homeland. The potato crop had failed, times were hard. Owen, the eldest son of a family living in Dundalk Island, managed the family farm. He left the farm to his youngest brother and set sail to England and Brandon Colliery. Owen married Jane Keenan. They bought a house in newly built Station Avenue, built by a New Bransford building contractor, also named Woods. Brandon's population is now 15,573, an increase of 1,333 since the 1891 census was taken. Coal owners and pitmen were united on one issue. The government put a coal tax on export duty of £1 per tonne to help fight the Boer War. Durham's miners bitterly opposed it, as did the owners. The latter consented to closing the pits for 2 days to allow pitmen to hold mass meetings in protest. 58-year-old Alex Welsh spent his shift shunting tugs back and forth at the air pit. He ran his loco into the engine shed. He collapsed in his cabin and died before medical assistance could be procured. Brandon Variety Social Party held a dance for his widow. 70 couples attended. The proceeds amounted to £2 3 shillings and sixpence. The truce between master and man was short-lived. The owners, despite the favourable state of the coal trade during the last 3 months, sought a reduction of 6.25%. The men's representatives eventually secured the reduction of 5%. Another year ended on a dismal note, 70 colliery folk having died, the last one on New Year's Eve, into 1902. 244 coke ovens, each with a 10 feet diameter, and 264 with a 10.5 feet diameter, lie sprawled on the south side of the colliery. When in use, their dull red glow hovers over the colliery rows and can be seen from miles away. Straker and Love appealed to the assessment committee respecting deductions when the August rate for the coke ovens is assessed. The conversation turned upon the earth revolving when an old man said, "I'll never believe the world gan's round. I've avoided it mony a time, but nobody will persuade me of that." One of the company drew an imitation of the globe and was proceeding to explain when he was stopped by the old man. "It's no use," he said. "It's no use trying to push that down my throat. I've had far harder men than ye at me, and it's all no use." "Well, but listen," the other replied. No, continued our old friend. "I can prove I'm right. I've worked in the pit since I was 9 years old. I've gone in both night, first and back shift, and I've gone yam at all times of the night, and the coke ovens were always opposite our back door." The walls of the Red Lion Inn failed to veil the sound of men's angry voices. Some dispute concerning the raising of pigeons would have ended in blows but for the intervention of the landlord. Next day, January the 4th, saw trains converge on Durham. A crowded train carried excited passengers en route for the city, a distance of 2.5 miles from Brandon Colliery's railway station. Without ceremony, the shops in the old city were illuminated by electricity. Shoppers were delighted. The new form of lighting greatly enhanced the window display. The recent death of William Mackay left a sad gap in the ranks of the local colliery union lodge. He had been a member of the Durham Miners Association from its commencement. Many parts of the county had seen William work actively in the cause of the union in its earliest days. Brandon Miners Lodge sent a letter of sympathy to his widow. Thomas Wright finished his coal union shift at 4:20 on Friday on pay Friday afternoon. Thomas headed homewards. his sister Catherine would have a meal ready for him in their colliery house in Sunderland Street. A long night lay ahead. Thomas liked a drink of beer. He would turn out around 8 o'clock. His favourite pub, Mad Bates's Red Lion Inn, lay snug in the hollow at the foot of the colliery ballast heaps, whose summits lay quite near his home. Tom, a quiet lad, had moved with his family into the colliery rows 8 months previously. He was little known in the colliery of 26 streets and several hundred houses. Just after 8 p.m, Thomas crossed the ballast heap on which James Orton of 56 Park Street and a miner at the colliery had erected a potato chip van, a cold January night with a thin covering of snow. Jim looked forward to good trade. Besides the regular pedestrian traffic between Brandon Colliery and the Boyne, people came from the rows for delicious fried chips. Customers called on the way home after Red Lion Inn closing time. Friday night, being pay night, was his best night. At 10:30, Thomas Smith, a putter living at 18 South Street, and his mate Andrew McGregor, also a putter from Durham Street, called into the pub, having spent the earlier part of the night at the Boyne. They saw James Lynch from Sunderland Street, a collier, seated in the tap room in heated conversation with the swarthy 28-year-old Brandon Colliery collier. Their talk, a continuation from 2 weeks previously, concerning the flying of racing pigeons. Robert Wilson, Joseph Poughton and Caleb Lee, all miners, were present in the tap room. At closing time, Thomas Wright climbed the heap's acclivity on which the chip potato van and several pigeon crays were perched. He ordered his usual 3 pennyworth. A drink of beer had put an edge on his appetite. An argument and scuffle took place just at the fringe of light thrown by the chip van's single oil lamp. Blows were exchanged. The noise of battle attracted some 30 people from nearby colliery houses. People returning from the Boyne joined the inquisitive crowd. James Poughton and the swarthy miner had words. More blows were struck. Thomas Wright pulled Poughton away from the conflict. Thomas fell. A fierce pain gripped him. He felt his body lowered down. Blood saturated his fingers. Catherine Wright, attracted by the commotion, left the house at 11:30. Her brother had not arrived home. She joined the milling crowd. Thomas Wright was carried home in a state of shock. He was placed on the kitchen mat. On examination, he was found to have stab wounds in the bowels, part of which were protruding. Police Constable Forrest was called. Dr. McIntyre was sent for to attend Joseph Poughton in his home, 16 Durham Street. He had a cut in his right thigh, a suspected knife wound. The doctor was requested to call on James Lynch, who suffered from a cut on the left thigh, also thought to be knife inflicted. Whilst attending to James, he was asked to call on the Wrights' home. Dr. McIntyre, on examining Thomas Wright, diagnosed stab wounds and ordered an ambulance for his prompt removal to Durham Hospital. The swarthy miner was immediately put under arrest. There were 4 applicants for the post of surveyor for the Brandon and Byshottles Urban District Council. Mr. J. Mackenzie of Leighton Buzzard was chosen. A salary of £140 a year payable quarterly goes with the job. A successful cafe chantant was held in the colliery school by members of the Wesleyan Society. 2 of the most interesting items of the 3-day entertainment were a nigger sketch, the Darktown Parish Council, and the highly acclaimed melodious Aldi Brontroph Band. The latter is to give a performance in the Durham Town Hall. Photos and curios from South Africa were viewed with much interest. The recent stabbing affair took precedence in colliery gossip. 8 days after the incident, tragic news was discussed. Thomas Wright had died in hospital from peritonitis. The man in custody was given a further remand. The case was now one of murder. People left Brandon Colliery in the early hours to hear the case at the Assize Court in Durham. One man walked 6 miles from Chesley Street and appeared at the door of the courthouse at 7 a.m. Most of the seats in the court were taken by women. After 5 hours' deliberation, the court was cleared. Women and girls grumbled they would miss the verdict. A chastened and repentant prisoner received his sentence. On a recommendation to mercy, the prisoner was sentenced to 12 years penal servitude. The death rate in the colliery rose was very heavy in April, a month during which 12 cases of scarlet fever and one of typhoid fever were detected. It was twice that of a normal month. 5 patients were removed to the isolation hospital. 30 houses were restored to prevent the spread of the diseases. It was proposed to build a caretaker's cottage near the hospital. The caretaker at present lives in a house some distance away in the colliery rows. Lord Boyne has agreed to lease the site of the Fever Hospital and additional ground for the building of a caretaker's lodge for 50 years at the yearly rental of £7.10. These generous terms were made mainly on account of the building being a public hospital. At a meeting of the Brandon Urban District Council, it was decided to carry on with the work. James Little, at 42, was a popular and efficient deputy overman. He was president of the local Deputies Association and a member of Medfield Store Committee. James was injured in the sea pit explosion in 1899. Despite his injuries, he assisted in the rescue operations afterwards. He was drawing timber in the same seam when a fall of stone killed him instantly. Andrew Horton and Martin Tunney, hurrying to the spot, removed the stone. Hugh McDermott, also involved in the 1899 explosion rescue, a miner keen to learn, was elected Secretary of Brandon Technical Education Committee for 12 months. He replaces John Gillis, who has left the district. As 50,000 attended the 31st Miners' Big Meeting in Durham, Edward Orr mourned the loss of Winifred, his infant daughter. Edward Hewitson and J.T. Gades, both miners, each lost an infant son. After long delays due to the prince's illness, August the 9th saw the coronation of 61-year-old Edward and Princess Alexandra. The coronation festivities coincided with the declaration of peace. The Boer War was finished after 20,000 lives had been forfeit. Trooper Huntley, Corporal Shell and Private Story, all Brandon men, have served in South Africa. The latter was seriously ill with fever while serving abroad. To help make the celebrations a success, Brandon Literary Institute gave £25, Straker and Love £20, Brandon and Bishop's Co-op Society gave £15. The committee has £108 in hand. The committees of the A, B and C pits, together with the Literary Institute, provided a further £20, which, when shared out, amounted to 7 shillings to each old person living in the colliery. The Brandon District Council procured 3,572 coronation mugs at 4 shillings per dozen. Each child received a mug, while children between the ages of 3 and 16, together with the aged, infirm, poor and widows, were provided with a substantial tea. Local volunteers and members of Brandon Band arranged sports in the colliery field. The torchlight procession, display of fireworks and the bonfire on the hill drew ecstatic crowds. Another great peace parade in which prizes were given for the best comic horseman, best comic cyclist toured the area. Fancy dress was the order of the day. Revellers on horse and on foot vied with one another for prizes. The parade meandered through Langley of Brandon's long Sunland Street, round Meadowfield and on to Littleburn. Streets en route were decorated with banners and an assortment of streamers. Brandon Colliery provided a field on which an old men's race took place. There was a putters contest, rails being laid on which young putters displayed their prowess at their job. Rockets were fired, a balloon was released. At 10 p.m, a huge crowd cheered as the colliery manager, Mr. E. L. Elwin, lit a massive bonfire. Residents of the area are glad that some progress has been made with the scheme for the construction of an electric railway between Durham and Brandon. Plans are out for the sheds to be built at Brandon. A provisional committee has been working hard in Brandon with a view of establishing a workmen's club. There is only one public house, a tied one, which is considered inadequate for a village of some 5,000 inhabitants. At a large meeting presided over by James Turner, the following resolutions were unanimously agreed to. 1. That in the opinion of this meeting, the proposal to establish a workmen's club in Brandon deserves the hearty support of all classes. 2. That those present at the meeting pledge themselves to use their best exertions to make the undertaking as successful as possible. James Turner was elected President, George Winter Secretary, James Wilkinson Treasurer, and a committee of 10 members. Mr. Turner spoke of the needs in the district of a club of an educational character. He urged all present to make the club worthy of its name and not a drinking club, as it had been so called by some people who did not know the intentions of the Provisional Committee. The publication of the foregoing brought a swift response. At a public meeting of the various religious and temperance societies presided over by the Reverend Mr. Day, it was unanimously resolved that each society petition the promoters of the proposed Workmen's Club with a view of showing the evil results which the meeting believed would necessarily follow from the increased facilities for drinking such a club would provide. It was also decided to hold an open-air meeting on the subject at an early date. The Durham Light Railway was the dream child of William Dickinson, an active worker in local affairs who died in 1896. He spent most of his working life at Brandon Colliery. He founded the Brandon Colliery Order of Foresters. A commencement will be shortly made with the construction of the tramway from Durham to Brandon. Garden holders at Meadowfield have received intimation that all garden produce must be cleared up by September, as the land required for the construction of sheds for the tramcars. When the Brandon line is completed, there is to be a terminus near the St. Margaret's Cemetery, Durham. A flippant citizen remarked that there will then be a version of Grey, something after the style, "The path of the tramcar leads but to the grave." After 6 months of work, the new club, inaugurated by the Brandon Centre Ward and Meadowfield Social Club and Institute Limited, was formally opened by Mr. Thomas Carr in the absence of the President, Mr. Turner. The premises occupied by Mr. Robert Edley and owned by Mr. Frank Foster was bought at a cost of £500. Membership is confined exclusively to workmen residing or working within the limits of Brandon Centre Ward and Meadowfield. Up to the present time, over 200 workmen have signed their willingness to become members. The shares are of the value of £3, which can be paid by instalments, the lowest instalment being 2 shillings and sixpence. Continued on side 11.